At my son's Christmas dinner, my daughter-in-law said don't touch anything, so I don't touch anything. My daughter-in-law's voice sliced through the festive chatter as she slapped my hand away from the antique china. Standing in the kitchen I had secretly paid for, I watched her smirk, confident she was the queen of a castle she did not own. She thought I was a helpless widow about to be evicted, never suspecting that I held the deed to this house, and her eviction notice was already printed in my mind. My name is Margaret Doyle, but most people in Ridgeview, Colorado, just call me Maggie. At 68 years old, I thought I knew every sharp edge of grief, but nothing could have prepared me for walking into my own son's house 2 weeks after his funeral. Lucas was gone, taken by a sudden heart attack at only 41, and tonight was the first Christmas Eve without him. I stood in the entryway, clutching my purse against my chest, feeling like an intruder in the home my husband and I had built with our own hands decades ago. The house was suffocatingly festive. Fairy lights blinked aggressively from the banister, and the air was heavy with the scent of roasting turkey and spiced pumpkin pie. To anyone else, it looked like a perfect holiday gathering. But to me, the red and green decorations were filtered through a grey haze. The silence of the grave still rang in my ears, drowning out the soft carol music playing in the background. Sabrina, my daughter-in-law, moved through the room like a queen holding court. At 38, she was dressed in shimmering black silk, playing the role of the grieving yet resilient hostess to perfection. She guided guests through the living room, gesturing grandly to the high ceilings and the bay windows, referring to it all as her new home. She did not look at me. She did not introduce me. I was a ghost in the corner, pushed to the margins of the very floorboards I had paid for. I needed to do something with my hands to keep them from shaking. I walked toward the kitchen, intending to help set the table. Instinctively, I reached for the upper cabinet, where we always kept my mother's antique china. Those plates with the delicate gold rims had been on this table for every Christmas since Lucas was a boy. My fingers had just grazed the cool porcelain handle when a hand clamped down on my wrist. Sabrina was there in an instant. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her manicured nails digging into my skin. She dropped her voice to a low, icy hiss that the guests in the next room could not hear. Don't touch anything. Maggie. Tonight. I want things done my way. The chatter in the dining room seemed to snag and freeze for a second. A few guests near the archway looked over, then quickly averted their eyes, pretending they had not just seen the widow scolding her mother-in-law like a disobedient child. I stood there, my hand hovering in the air, feeling the heat of humiliation rise up my neck. Lucas was not here to smooth things over. I was completely alone. Sabrina released my arm and turned to her friends, her face instantly rearranging into a bright, plastic smile. She let out a light laugh, waving a hand toward me. You know how the older generation is, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Always trying to clutter things up with dusty old dishes. We are going for a clean, modern look this year. Her friends chuckled, casting pitying glances my way. In seconds, she had painted me as the senile, meddling nuisance in her sparkling sanctuary. I retreated to the edge of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. That was when I really looked around. The sturdy oak dining table my husband Patrick had built, the one with the scratch from Lucas's first toy car, was gone. In its place stood a cold slab of marble. I looked at the mantelpiece, our wedding photo, which had sat there for 20 years, had vanished. It was replaced by a blown-up canvas of Lucas and Sabrina. She was not just redecorating, she was erasing us. Amidst the noise, I moved to the kitchen island to pour myself a glass of water. Tucked halfway under a stack of festive napkins, a thick manila envelope caught my eye. The return address was stamped in bold black ink. Summit, title, and escrow. Below that, the words, property transfer. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter draft skittered down my spine. Why would there be transfer papers on the counter 2 weeks after a death before I could look closer? Sabrina swooped in. She snatched the envelope with the speed of a striking snake and shoved it into a drawer. She looked at me then, a glare so sharp and full of warning that it left no room for interpretation. Her eyes said clearly that this was no longer my business. Moments later, Sabrina tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute. The room went silent. She raised her glass, the crystal catching the light. "To Lucas," she said, her voice trembling with a practiced fragility, "and to our first Christmas in my home, to surviving and thriving as the sole owner of this beautiful place." The guests raised their glasses, murmuring their support. I stood stone still, the water in my glass trembling. The phrase sole owner hit me harder than the grief. I swallowed the words like a stone, cold and heavy in my throat. It was not just the audacity of the claim that chilled me. It was the precision of it. Sole owner. That term carried a legal weight that a grieving wife should not have been worrying about during a memorial dinner. A terrible clarity began to cut through the fog of my mourning. I looked at the drawer where she had hidden the envelope, then back at her triumphant smile. My mother's china was locked away, my husband's table was gone, and my son was dead. But as I watched Sabrina basking in the glow of the chandelier I had paid for, I realized something terrified me more than the loneliness. I realized that she was not just happy to own the house, she was relieved. And that relief terrified me more than anything else. To understand why the phrase sole owner chilled my blood, you have to understand where I came from. I grew up in Riverside Bluff, a place where people worked until their backs broke and still had nothing to show for it. For 40 years, I was a financial clerk for Northwind County Support Services. I did not build skyscrapers or run hedge funds, but I knew how to spot a missing decimal point in a ledger from across the room. I spent 4 decades watching people sign away their lives on dotted lines they did not read. I learned early on that paper does not lie, even when people do. My husband, Patrick, was a man of mortar and brick. We bought the house on Snowcrest Hill when it was nothing but a rotting frame and a wild dream. We poured every cent we had into it. Patrick laid those oak floorboards himself, his knees bruising against the hardwood night after night, while I painted the walls until my shoulders burned. That house was not just wood and stone to us. It was our sweat. It was the physical proof that we existed. I remember the Christmases when Lucas was small. He would run circles around the tree, his laughter bouncing off the walls we had sanded down together. We did not have much money then, so I wrapped his gifts in newspaper comics to save a few dollars. It was simple, but it was ours. Every scratch on the doorframe measured his height. Every stain on the carpet had a story. To Sabrina, this place was real estate. To me, it was history. Patrick and I were quiet about our success. We started buying up dilapidated properties in the working-class districts, the ones nobody else wanted. Patrick fixed them, and I managed the books. Slowly, house by house. We built a small empire. We did not flash it around with fancy cars or vacations. Instead, we locked it all away safely in the Doyle Family Holdings Trust, drafted by a sharp young lawyer named Naomi Price. We wanted Lucas to be secure, not spoiled. We taught Lucas to read a balance sheet before he could ride a bike. But somewhere along the way, the frugality that saved us made him hungry for the shine of a life we avoided. Then he brought Sabrina home. She worked in corporate marketing and looked the part, with shiny hair, expensive shoes, and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She charmed Patrick easily. But I saw how she looked at our house. She did not see a home. She saw an asset with renovation potential. The red flags were subtle at first. Over dinner, she would casually suggest that Lucas should convince us to take the Snowcrest house out of that complicated trust. She would pout when I politely declined to add her name to any bank accounts. She called it modern partnership, but I called it insurance. When Patrick died in an accident on a construction site, my world collapsed. But his voice stayed in my head, telling me to protect what we built. I stuck to the clause we had written in stone. All assets remained in the trust for Lucas, but no spouse could touch a dime or a deed until they had been married for 10 years. It was harsh, perhaps, but necessary. Lucas did not take it well. Driven by love, or perhaps something else, he begged me to transfer the house to him and Sabrina outright. He told me she felt like a guest in her own home. But every time I looked at Sabrina, I saw a calculator behind her eyes, tallying up the equity. I refused. It created a crack between my son and me that never fully healed. That brings me to the phone call on Christmas Eve. Just weeks before he died. Lucas called me, and his voice sounded heavy, drained of all its usual energy. He told me that next year, he would handle everything himself. He said he wanted Sabrina to feel comfortable. At the time, I thought he was just setting boundaries. Now, when I replay that conversation in my mind, I hear the tremble in his voice. It was not the sound of a man taking charge. It was the sound of a man who was afraid. The last of the guests drifted out into the cold night, leaving behind the scent of stale wine and extinguished candles. The house, once filled with the noise of a party that felt more like a performance, fell into a suffocating silence. Sabrina did not start cleaning. Instead, she walked into the living room, where my husband's comfortable armchair had been replaced by a stiff, white sectional that looked too expensive to sit on. She patted the cushion beside her, a gesture that was not an invitation, but a summons. She pulled the manila envelope stamped Summit title and escrow from the drawer where she had hidden it earlier. With slow, deliberate movements, she spread the documents across the marble coffee table. Lucas signed this 1 month before he died, she said, her voice devoid of the trembling grief she had displayed for her friends. It is a quitclaim deed. He transferred full ownership of the Snowcrest house to me. My hands shook as I reached for my reading glasses. I pulled the paper closer. The legal jargon was standard, but when my eyes found the bottom of the page, my breath hitched. The name was Lucas, but the signature was wrong. The lines were shaky, the loops of the L and B distorted, lacking the firm, confident stroke my son had practiced since he was a teenager. It looked like the writing of a man whose hand was being guided, or worse, a man whose body was failing him. He was in trouble. Maggie, Sabrina said, leaning back and crossing her legs. Credit card debt. Failed investments. He was drowning. He begged me to bail him out, and he used the house as collateral. I looked up at her. incredulous. Lucas was meticulous. He had never carried a balance on a card in his life. I tried to explain this, my voice rising in panic. I told her about the Doyle Family Holdings Trust. I told her that the house was not Lucas's to give away because it belonged to the legal entity my husband and I had created. Sabrina laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. That trust is just a tax dodge, Maggie. It does not mean anything in the real world. The courts look at this deed. This is what matters. Her ignorance was staggering, but her confidence was terrifying. She truly believed that a piece of paper she had likely bullied him into signing could dismantle decades of estate planning. Then she slid a smaller piece of paper toward me. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was smoother here, but the words felt alien. Mom, please do not interfere. Let me take care of my wife for the first time. Just let it go. It sounded nothing like my son. It sounded like the marketing copy Sabrina wrote for her day job, persuasive, emotional, and completely manufactured. She snatched the papers back and filed them neatly into the envelope. So, here is the reality, she said, her tone hardening. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. A woman of your age needs a better environment, perhaps an assisted living facility where people can watch you. If you are not out by then, I will have to call the police for trespassing. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the urge to scream, to flip the marble table, to tear the lying smirk off her face. But they did not come. Instead, my heart rate slowed. The roaring in my ears faded into a cold, sharp clarity. The grief that had paralyzed me for 2 weeks suddenly solidified into a block of ice in my chest. She had just declared war, but she had no idea she was standing on a minefield I had planted years ago. I stood up, smoothed down my skirt, and looked her in the eye. Okay, I said softly. Sabrina blinked, her mouth opening slightly. She had expected a fight. She had rehearsed for a scene, and I had denied her the audience. You are just going to leave? She asked, suspicion clouding her victory. I do not need 30 days. I replied. I turned and walked to the guest room I had been staying in. Inside the closet was my old blue travel bag. I had kept it packed for years, a habit from the days when Patrick and I would travel on short notice to inspect new properties. I threw in a few changes of clothes and my toiletries. Then, I reached between the mattress and the box spring and pulled out a thick, leather-bound notebook. It was the master ledger for the trust, containing the details of every asset, every deed, and every law that protected them. I walked to the front door, the bag slung over my shoulder. I did not look back at the kitchen I had tiled or the walls I had painted. I stepped out onto the porch, the winter air biting my cheeks. You do not know what you have just done. Maggie Sabrina called out from the doorway, her voice shrill, trying to reclaim the power she felt slipping away. You are making a mistake. I paused for a second, my hand on the railing. She was right. One of us was making a mistake that would cost them everything. But as I walked down the driveway into the dark, I knew with absolute certainty that it was not me. I checked into the Starlight Motel on the outskirts of town, a place where the neon sign buzzed loud enough to keep you awake, and the sheets smelled faintly of bleach and regret. It was a far cry from the marble countertops Sabrina was currently polishing, but I did not mind. It was only a base of operations. The first thing I did was pick up the phone and call Naomi Price. Sabrina had dismissed Naomi as some no-name tax attorney we used to file paperwork. She had no idea that Naomi was the sharpest estate lawyer in the state, a woman who could smell a loophole from a mile away and seal it shut before you even knew it was open. The next morning, I sat in Naomi's corner office on the 20th floor of the Ridgeview Tower, overlooking the city. I laid it all out for her. I told her about the Christmas dinner, the way Sabrina had practically hissed at me not to touch my own china, the handwritten note that sounded like a bad press release, and the quitclaim deed that supposedly transferred the Snowcrest house to Sabrina. Naomi listened without blinking, her pen tapping a silent rhythm on her legal pad. When I finished, she did not offer tea or sympathy. She turned her monitor around so I could see the screen. "Look at this. Maggie," she said, her voice calm and professional. On the screen was the flowchart of the Doyle Family Holdings Trust. It was a beautiful spiderweb of assets. There were the 3 apartment complexes in the industrial district, the strip mall on 4th Street, the undeveloped acreage on the West Ridge, and right there in the center, the house on Snowcrest Hill. Legally. Lucas never owned that house, Naomi explained, pointing a manicured finger at the screen. The trust owns the house. You and Lucas were beneficiaries, but the title is held by the entity. Lucas could not have transferred the deed to Sabrina even if he wanted to. You cannot give away what you do not own. That quitclaim deed she waved in your face. It is worth less than the paper it is printed on. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but Naomi was not finished. She clicked open an email folder. But here is the part that makes this criminal. She said, 2 weeks before he died. Lucas sent me this. She opened an attachment. It was a scan of the very same quitclaim deed Sabrina had shown me. In the body of the email, Lucas had written Naomi. "Can you check this? Sabrina says the bank needs it for some refinancing adjustment. Just a formality to show household assets. She says it won't actually change the title. Is that true?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Lucas had not betrayed me. He had been tricked. He had hesitated. Naomi pulled up a second document, a forensic analysis report. "I sent the scan to a handwriting expert immediately," she said. "Look at the signature. See the microscopic tremors in the downstroke of the L. And here, the hesitation mark on the B. This wasn't signed. It was traced. Someone put a light source under a real signature of his and tried to copy it. It is a clumsy, amateur forgery." I sat back in the leather chair, the implications settling in like lead weights. Sabrina was not just a greedy daughter-in-law trying to grab a house. She was a criminal. She had forged a legal document, lied to her husband about its purpose, and then tried to use that fake document to evict me. And if she was willing to break the law to get the property, what else was she willing to do? The timeline terrified me. The forged deed, the pressure on Lucas, and then, just 2 weeks later, a sudden heart attack in a healthy 41-year-old man. Naomi seemed to read my mind. She leaned forward, her expression hardening. "We have 2 options. Maggie, we can file a civil suit for fraud and trespassing, get an emergency injunction to kick her out and humiliate her in court. That gets you the house back." She paused, waiting for me to catch up. "Or," she continued, "we go nuclear. We submit this evidence to the district attorney. We allege fraud, but we also petition the medical examiner to reopen the file on Lucas's death. If she forged his signature to get the assets, her motive for his death becomes immediate and financial." I looked at the city below, thinking of my son. I thought of him asking his lawyer if he was safe, trusting his wife while she was tracing his name onto a lie. I did not just want the house. I wanted the truth. Dig it all up, I said, my voice steady. Even if we have to dig up the coffin. I want to know exactly what she did to him. Naomi nodded, a fierce light entering her eyes. She placed her hand on the thick file of the Doyle Family Holdings Trust. Sabrina thinks she is fighting a lonely old widow who only has a single house to her name, Naomi said, a cold smile playing on her lips. She has no idea that half of Ridgeview is standing on your land. Let us see how she handles a war with a woman who owns the ground she walks on. Naomi wasted no time shifting gears from defense to offense. She introduced me to Caleb Hart, a private investigator she kept on retainer for cases that required digging through dirt. Caleb was a former homicide detective from a neighboring precinct, a man who looked like he had slept in his car for the last 3 nights. His trench coat was wrinkled, and his jaw was covered in grey stubble. But when he looked at me, his eyes were sharp, clear, and terrifyingly intelligent. He did not offer condolences. He just opened his laptop and started dissecting my family's life. His first move was to test Sabrina's narrative. She claimed Lucas was the one in debt, Caleb said, his voice raspy. In my experience, when a spouse says that, they are usually projecting. Let us see who was really bleeding money. He tapped a few keys, and the results appeared on the screen in brutal black and white. Lucas had a credit score over 800. His finances were boring and stable, with a steady paycheck from Frontier Motors, where he had managed the engineering floor for 10 years. There were no secret loans, no gambling debts, and no failed investments. Then Caleb pulled up Sabrina's file. It was a catastrophe. She had 0 assets in her name. Every credit card she held was maxed out to the limit, and 3 applications for limit increases had been denied in the last 6 months alone. But that was just the surface. Caleb dug deeper into the bank statements. She has been busy, Caleb muttered. Online sports betting accounts, 3 different crypto wallets on unregulated exchanges, and a lot of money poured into high-risk Forex platforms that look like Ponzi schemes. He turned the screen toward me. The final figure was highlighted in red, $120,000. That was how much debt Sabrina was drowning in. I felt the air leave my lungs and had to lean back against the leather chair to keep from sliding to the floor. She had blown through a fortune while lecturing me about my old furniture. Caleb did not give me time to process the shock. He clicked a file named Evidence-CCTV. It was grainy footage from a gas station security camera, dated just 4 days before Lucas died. It showed Lucas's car parked at a pump. Inside, Lucas and Sabrina were arguing, even without audio. The anger was palpable. Suddenly, Lucas threw a stack of papers at her. They fluttered around the dashboard like white birds. I tracked down what those papers were, Caleb said. He pulled up a statement from a family law attorney named Maria Santos. Lucas had visited Maria 2 weeks prior. He wasn't not just asking for advice. He had signed divorce papers. He had also executed a new will. He told Maria he wanted to wait until after the holidays to serve Sabrina the papers because he did not want to ruin Christmas for the family. He was too kind for his own good. Caleb scrolled to the terms of the new will. It was explicit. All personal assets, including his savings, his car, and his life insurance policy, were beneficiary designated to me. If the divorce went through, or if there was any evidence of financial infidelity, Sabrina was to receive absolutely nothing. The picture was coming together with terrifying speed. Caleb started connecting the dots out loud. She was $120,000 in the hole. She was about to be served divorce papers that would leave her homeless and penniless. She had been cut out of the will. The only way she stays afloat is if Lucas dies before those papers are served, and before he can legally secure the house. Naomi looked at me. It is a classic triangle. Maggie, motive, means, opportunity. A sudden, sickening memory flashed in my mind. For the last month of his life, Lucas had complained about feeling sluggish and nauseous, and every morning, Sabrina had insisted on making his coffee. I could hear her voice in my head, sweet and cloying. Let me get it. Honey, you always forget to take your vitamins. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I had thought she was being a devoted wife. Now, I realized I might have been watching her poison him one cup at a time. Naomi closed the folder. The sound was loud in the quiet office. We have enough. Maggie, this is not just fraud anymore. I am drafting a formal request to the Ridgeview medical examiner. We need to request an exhumation and a full toxicology panel. My heart seized. The idea of disturbing my son's rest, of pulling him back up from the earth, was a horror I had never imagined. But then I thought of Sabrina sitting in his house, drinking wine, thinking she had won. I thought of Lucas's shaky signature on that deed, traced by the hand that likely killed him. He deserves the truth, I whispered, my voice trembling, but my resolve hard as stone. I looked at Naomi and nodded. Dig him up. Let his blood testify against her. Before the medical examiner could even release the preliminary report, Sabrina launched a preemptive strike. She did not hire a publicist. She simply opened TikTok and turned on the ring light. I sat in Naomi's conference room, staring at a tablet screen, watching a video that had already amassed 2 million views in less than 24 hours. There was Sabrina, curled up on the white sectional in my son's living room, wearing an oversized sweater that made her look small and fragile. Her mascara was artfully smudged, and her voice broke at perfect intervals. She looked into the camera and wept about the cruel, wealthy mother-in-law who was evicting a grieving widow on Christmas. The caption read simply, "Justice for Widow Sabrina." The viral momentum was instant and terrifying. It pulled in the local media like sharks to blood. Kelly Stanton, a reporter for Channel 8 who specialized in human interest pieces that lacked actual humanity, aired a segment that evening. They framed the story as a David versus Goliath battle. Sabrina was the brave, heartbroken survivor, and I was the old, heartless real estate tycoon hoarding wealth. In the interview, Sabrina sat by the fireplace, the one where she had removed my wedding photo, and lied with a fluidity that was almost impressive. She told Kelly that I had hated her from the first day because she came from a poor background. She claimed I locked the kitchen cabinets to keep her from using the good plates. And then she dropped the bomb that made my hands clench into fists on the mahogany table. She told me. Sabrina sobbed, looking directly into the lens, that I shouldn't touch anything. She slapped my hand away from a plate and said, "Don't touch anything. Sabrina, you don't belong here. This is my house." I felt the bile rise in my throat. She had taken the very knife she twisted in my gut and placed the handle in my hand. She had stolen my humiliation and worn it as a costume. I started to stand up, an urge to drive down to the station and scream the truth clawing at my chest. But Naomi reached out and firmly gripped my forearm. "Sit down." "Maggie," Naomi said, her voice low and hard. "Do not engage. If you fight her on Facebook, you lose." You look defensive. Let her talk. The more she talks, the more rope she gives us. On the screen, Kelly Stanton was interviewing my neighbors, people I had baked cookies for, people who had known Lucas since he was in diapers. They shook their heads sadly, saying they always knew Maggie was strict, or that it was a shame to see a young woman treated so poorly. It felt like watching my entire life in Ridgeview being rewritten by strangers who watched a 3-minute clip. In the corner of the room, Caleb was not watching the emotional performance. He was wearing headphones, staring at his laptop, logging data. He paused the video, typed something, and then looked up. Keep talking, sweetheart. He muttered to the screen. In this interview, she says Lucas died in his sleep. In the police report, she said she found him on the kitchen floor. And in her Facebook post from 2 days ago, she said he collapsed after a fight with you. He turned the laptop to show us a spreadsheet. He was collecting every tweet, every clip, every contradiction. While Sabrina was winning the court of public opinion, she was shredding her credibility in the court of law. My phone buzzed incessantly. I made the mistake of looking at my social media notifications. My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers. Some called me a witch. Others sent memes with my face photoshopped onto monsters. I felt the crushing weight of 1,000 judgment calls made by people who did not know my son's middle name, let alone the truth of his death. I turned the phone over and placed it face down. I took a deep breath, forcing my pulse to slow. I remembered the years I spent auditing ledgers. Numbers did not care about feelings. Facts did not care about tears. If she wants to fight with a camera, I said, my voice steadying, I will answer her with a microscope. Just then, the landline on Naomi's desk rang. It was a sharp, jarring sound that cut through the low murmur of the television. Naomi answered it. She listened for a long time, her face draining of colour. She did not say a word, just scribbled something on her legal pad and hung up. She looked at me, and the terrifying silence in the room told me that the social media drama was over. That was the medical examiner's office, Naomi said quietly. The preliminary toxicology results are back. They found serious anomalies. Maggie. They want us to come down there immediately. I stood up, grabbing my coat. The internet could have its hashtags. I was about to get the truth. The fluorescent lights of the county morgue hummed with a sound that felt like a drill pressing into my temple. Dr. Helen Morales, the chief medical examiner, did not offer us a seat. She simply spread a series of charts and toxicology reports across the stainless steel table. The papers rustled in the quiet room, sounding violently loud. I found high concentrations of warfarin in your son's liver and blood plasma, Dr. Morales said. Her voice clinically detached, but her eyes kind. Warfarin is an anticoagulant. It is used in blood thinners for heart patients. But in high enough doses, it is the primary active ingredient in many brands of rat poison. I felt my knees weaken, and Caleb gripped my elbow to steady me. Dr. Morales continued, pointing to a jagged graph on the page. This was not a single accidental ingestion. Mrs. Doyle. The levels indicate accumulation. He was being poisoned slowly over a period of several weeks. It starts with bruising, fatigue, bleeding gums. Eventually, it leads to massive internal hemorrhaging. His heart did not just stop. It failed because his body was drowning from the inside out. Caleb pulled a file from his coat pocket. I checked Lucas's medical records going back 5 years, he said, his voice grating like sandpaper. He was on a multivitamin and an occasional antihistamine for seasonal allergies. No doctor ever prescribed him blood thinners. Dr. Morales nodded, confirming the impossibility of a medical error. Then she pointed to the analysis of the stomach contents. We found heavy traces of caffeine and lipid residues consistent with dairy. Given the timeline of the absorption, the poison was likely administered in a liquid vehicle, something strong enough to mask the taste. The coffee. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I looked at Caleb, and he was already scrolling through his phone. He turned the screen toward us. It showed a text thread between Lucas and Sabrina from the last month of his life. There were dozens of messages where Sabrina insisted on her role as the morning caretaker. "Do not let your mom make the coffee. Honey, I bought that special roast you like. Let me fix it for you." What I had interpreted as a wife's possessive love was actually a dosage schedule. Caleb swiped to the next image. It was a grainy still from a security camera at a local hardware store. It showed Sabrina in a baseball cap and sunglasses, standing at the checkout counter. She was paying cash. On the counter sat 2 large boxes of Home Shield Pro. I looked up the ingredients of Home Shield Pro. Caleb said, "It is 90% inert filler, 0.05% bromadiolone. That is a potent anticoagulant." She bought this 3 days before Lucas started complaining to his doctor about unexplained bruising. Then came the final nail in the coffin. Caleb pulled up a printed email. It was sent from Sabrina's personal account to an encrypted address belonging to Rex Marino, a known bookie running an underground gambling ring in the city. The timestamp was 1 week before Lucas died. The message was short. "You will have your money before the end of the month. I found a way. Trust me." Naomi let out a slow, shaky breath. She looked at the spread of evidence, the debts, the divorce papers, the forged deed, the rat poison, and the coffee. "It is a perfect triangle," she whispered. "Motive, means, opportunity?" She waited until you were out of the house, isolated him, and killed him to stop him from leaving her. I looked at the toxicology report, imagining my son drinking his morning coffee, trusting the woman who handed it to him, while his own blood turned against him. I felt as if someone had reached into my chest and placed my heart on the cold metal table next to the papers. But strangely, the grief did not crush me. Instead, it calcified. The hot, tearing pain of loss cooled into a jagged, unbreakable resolve. I did not want to scream. I did not want to pull her hair or scratch her face. I wanted to bury her under a mountain of paper so heavy she would never see the sun again. Naomi picked up her phone and dialed a number she clearly knew by heart. She spoke briefly, her voice sharp and commanding. 20 minutes later, we were in the office of District Attorney Jordan Blake. Jordan was a man known for his aggressive stance on domestic violence cases. He read through the files in silence, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, looking me in the eye. "If the evidence in these files holds up, we are not just looking at a murder trial. We are looking at a case study in financial abuse, forgery, and media manipulation." He closed the folder with a heavy thud. "Let us get to work." The weeks leading up to the trial felt less like the passage of time and more like the slow tightening of a winch. District Attorney Jordan Blake moved with the calculated precision of a man who had seen every variety of human cruelty and knew exactly how to cage it. He convened a grand jury behind closed doors, a secret chamber where the narrative Sabrina had carefully constructed on TikTok began to dismantle. brick by brick. Sabrina was called to testify. According to Jordan, she walked in wearing black, playing the role of the grieving widow to the hilt. She stuck to her script, weeping about her love for Lucas and painting me as the villain of the piece. She told the grand jury that I was a senile, vindictive woman who had planted the rat poison story to steal the house back. She claimed she had never seen Home Shield Pro in her life. She did not know that sitting in Jordan's briefcase was a still image of her paying cash for that exact brand, wearing a baseball cap, with the receipt later recovered from her own kitchen trash can by Caleb. Every lie she told under oath was being recorded, not just as perjury, but as a tightening noose around her own neck. The grand jury did not need long. They voted to indict Sabrina on charges of first-degree murder with special circumstances for financial gain. Jordan had the arrest warrant signed and sitting on his desk, but he held off on executing it immediately. He wanted every single financial record from the offshore crypto accounts verified before the handcuffs went on. He wanted to ensure that when she ran, she would have nowhere to go. On a parallel track, Naomi was busy preparing a civil lawsuit for defamation. She called it a second front in the war. We were going to sue Sabrina for every lie she had told on the news, every false claim that damaged my reputation. It was not about the money. It was about ensuring that even if the criminal trial hit a snag, Sabrina would spend the rest of her life answering for her words in court. I spent my days in the DA's office, preparing my testimony. Jordan was gentle but rigorous. He made me relive that Christmas dinner over and over again. I had to describe the exact tone of Sabrina's voice when she said, "Don't touch anything." I had to describe the way she looked when she hid the property transfer papers. I had to recount Lucas's deterioration, the bruises I had thought were from work, the fatigue I had dismissed as stress. Sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights, dissecting my son's murder, was a torture I would not wish on my worst enemy. At night, back in the motel, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I found myself wrestling with a question that had no easy answer. Would sending Sabrina to prison for life actually heal the hole in my chest? Would it bring Lucas back to sit at my kitchen table? No. Justice is a cold comfort. It does not restore. It only balances. I realized that part of me was clinging to this legal battle because it gave me a sense of power. For 2 weeks, I had been the victim. Now, I was the architect of her downfall. I thought back to my 40 years at Northwind County Support Services. I had seen poverty drive good people to do desperate things. I had seen men gamble away their rent money and women steal to feed their children. But I had never seen this. I had never seen someone look into the eyes of a person they claimed to love and slowly poison them for an insurance payout. This was not desperation. This was a soulless calculation. That realization hardened my resolve. I decided then and there that I would not be the weeping mother on the stand. I would not give Sabrina the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would be precise. I would be cold. I would be the unshakable witness who remembered every date, every time, and every dollar amount. I would not let her lawyer provoke me into an emotional outburst. Sabrina, meanwhile, was still living in her delusion. Her new defense attorney, a slick operator named Grant Muller, saw the mountain of evidence and tried to save her. We heard through the grapevine that he strongly advised her to take a plea deal for manslaughter, arguing she could claim accidental overdose or diminished capacity. Sabrina refused. She fired back that she could charm the jury just like she charmed her social media followers. She believed her own performance. She thought a few tears and a sad story about a mean mother-in-law would outweigh forensic toxicology. The trial date was set for immediately after the winter break. The entire city of Ridgeview was buzzing. They called it the Christmas case. The lines were drawn between the quiet old woman who owned half the town and the young, photogenic widow who had cried on the evening news. They were expecting a drama. I was preparing for an execution of the truth. The first day of the trial was a spectacle. The courthouse hallway was a sea of cameras and microphones, buzzing like a hive of angry bees. Kelly Stanton was there with her camera crew, looking hungry for the next chapter of the story she had helped create. Then Sabrina arrived. She had traded her flashy designer clothes for a modest, high-necked black dress that swallowed her figure. She clutched a white handkerchief like a talisman, keeping her head bowed low. To the cameras, she looked like a saint walking into a lion's den. To me, she looked like a predator wearing the skin of its prey. Jordan Blake wasted no time with theatrics. He stood before the jury, buttoning his suit jacket, and spoke in a voice that cut through the humidity of the packed room. "This is not a story about a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law," he said, making eye contact with every juror. "This is a story about a woman who turned her husband's love and trust into a weapon, and then pulled the trigger for money." Grant Mueller, Sabrina's lawyer, stood up and smoothed his silk tie. He spoke of reasonable doubt and the lack of direct evidence. He painted the picture of a tragic accident, compounded by the bias of a grieving mother who never accepted her son's choice in women. He called the prosecution's case a string of coincidences stitched together by prejudice. It was a good speech, but speeches do not hold up against science. Dr. Morales was the first major blow to the defense. She detailed the warfarin levels in Lucas's liver with terrifying precision. When Mueller tried to suggest during cross-examination that Lucas might have been suicidal, Dr. Morales looked him dead in the eye. "Suicide is usually quick." "Counselor," she said, her voice flat. This was slow. This was agonizing. A man does not spend 4 weeks bleeding internally by choice. Then came Caleb Hart. He treated the courtroom like a classroom. He projected Sabrina's financial ruin onto the screen for everyone to see. The jury saw the gambling debts, the maxed-out credit cards, and the desperate emails to the bookie. Then he played the security footage from the hardware store. The sight of the grieving widow buying industrial-strength rat poison in cash silenced the room. In a stroke of brilliance, Jordan called Kelly Stanton to the stand. The reporter looked uncomfortable being on the other side of the microphone. Jordan played clips from her viral interview with Sabrina, then paused them to display the contradictory timestamps from police records. He proved that Sabrina had lied about the timeline of Lucas's death at least 3 times on national television. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand with my back straight. I recounted that Christmas Eve dinner. I described the coldness in her eyes when she told me, "Don't touch anything." I told the jury how she had toasted to being the sole owner of the house while my son was barely cold in the ground. It was not just grief speaking. It was the memory of her absolute certainty that she had won. Mueller tried to rattle me on cross-examination. He played a clip of the viral video where Sabrina cried about me, trying to make me look like a monster. "You never liked her, did you, Mrs. Doyle?" he asked, leaning in close. "You resented her for taking your son away." I looked at him, then at the jury. I did not raise my voice. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "I do not like debt, Mr. Mueller," I said clearly. "And I certainly do not like people who kill my son to pay for it." Naomi took the stand next to explain the Doyle Family Holdings Trust. She dismantled the defense's argument that Sabrina had no reason to rush. She explained that Sabrina was about to be divorced and cut out of the will. The only window she had to get any money was while Lucas was still alive and legally married. But the room truly stopped breathing when the bailiff opened the side door for the final witness of the day. Rex Marino walked in. He was a man in an orange jumpsuit, looking to trade information for a lighter sentence on his own racketeering charges. He sat down, looked at Sabrina, and shrugged. "Yeah, she owed me money," Rex said, his voice rough and unapologetic. "She was down about 40 grand to me alone. I told her time was up. She told me to relax. She said, and I quote, 'I will have the insurance money when my husband dies. Do not worry about it.'" Sabrina went pale. For the first time since the trial began, the handkerchief dropped from her hand. The gasp that went through the courtroom was not theatrical. It was the sound of a carefully crafted mask shattering into 1,000 pieces. In the final cross-examination, Jordan Blake did not pace the floor. He stood perfectly still, anchoring himself directly in front of Sabrina. He laid the pieces of our nightmare onto the ledge of the witness stand one by one. The receipt for the rat poison, the toxicology report showing the caffeine and warfarin in Lucas's stomach, the debt collection notices, the email to the bookie, the divorce petition, the new will. He looked at her and asked a simple question. "You had 3 choices, Mrs. Doyle: divorce and poverty, confession and prison, or widowhood and wealth. Which one did you pick?" Sabrina tried to summon the tears that had served her so well on TikTok. Her voice trembled as she blamed stress, misunderstandings, and even claimed Lucas might have been taking dangerous diet pills without her knowledge. But Jordan was ready. He played the footage from the gas station again, freezing the frame right where Lucas threw the divorce papers in her face. "Is that the face of a man taking diet pills?" Jordan asked. "Or is that the face of a man realizing his wife is a thief?" For a fleeting second, the mask slipped. Sabrina's lip curled, and her eyes narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated hatred. The jury saw it. The gallery saw it. The grieving widow vanished, and the cold-blooded killer appeared. Then Jordan delivered the final blow. He read aloud a text message Sabrina had sent to her best friend 2 days before the murder, recovered from a cloud backup. If the old man died first, at least Lucas would own it all. Now there is nothing. Only this house is mine. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. That single sentence proved she had calculated the inheritance down to the last penny. Her lawyer, Grant Mueller, tried to salvage the wreck on redirect. He brought up her history of blood donation and charity galas, but it was useless. We all saw the pattern now. Her kindness was just a costume she wore when the cameras were rolling. Jordan's closing statement was devoid of theatrics. He simply pointed to the empty chair where Lucas should have been. "She told the world she is a victim," he said softly. "But the blood in that coffee pot does not know how to lie. Who do we believe?" the jury filed out. I sat in the stillness, staring at the empty defense table. I thought about the Christmases past, the sound of Lucas's laugh, and the warmth of the kitchen before it became a crime scene. I wondered, if he were here, would he have the heart to forgive the woman he loved so blindly? I hoped not. The jury returned faster than anyone expected. The foreman stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he held the verdict form. "We find the defendant, Sabrina Doyle, guilty of murder in the 1st degree, with special circumstances of financial gain." Sabrina screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound that tore through the decorum of the court. She lunged toward the railing, screaming Lucas's name, then turned her venom on me. "You did this," she shrieked, her face twisted and red. "You ruined my life." But as the bailiff snapped the handcuffs onto her wrists, the click of the metal drowned out her lies. There were no friendly reporters waiting for her this time. No sympathetic hashtags. Just the cold reality of a cage. I did not cry. I waited for the tears, but they did not come. Instead, I felt the block of ice that had been sitting in my chest for months finally crack. It left behind a hollow, aching space. But the sharp, stabbing pain was gone. It was a cold justice, insufficient to bring my son back, but enough to let me look in the mirror without seeing a victim. I walked out of the courthouse into the grey winter afternoon of Ridgeview. The city was taking down its holiday decorations. I stood alone on the steps, watching the last of the Christmas lights flicker against the twilight. I thought about that night in the kitchen, about the way she had slapped my hand away and claimed ownership of my life. I looked up at the sky and whispered into the cold air. "You can rest now. Lucas, don't worry. I touched exactly what I needed to touch. I touched the truth. The law can handle the rest." I turned my collar up against the wind and walked toward my car, not looking back as the transport van carrying Sabrina turned the corner, heading down a road from which she would never return. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the verdict. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.